Hello and welcome to this series of tips on how to use ZbrushCore Core and other useful tricks. So in this tutorial we will get used to the interface, how to navigate, using hotkeys and other useful tricks. Navigating in ZBrush is a bit weird. It's not like how you navigate in Maya or in 3ds Max. We will start to learn on how to rotate in ZBrush. To rotate, click outside the mesh, holding the right click on the mouse. You can also use the left click as well. However, if you do this on the mesh, using the left click, you will start sculpting. To avoid this, always use the right click on the mouse. To zoom in ZBrush, hold Ctrl and move the mouse whilst holding right click. To pan in ZBrush, hold Alt and the right click whilst moving the mouse. If you use the left click of the mouse, you will start to sculpt. To avoid this, remember, always use the right click. If you start to sculpt by accident, just press Ctrl Z. Snapping the camera whilst rotating can be useful while sculpting. It can be handy in certain situations. To do this, whilst rotating, hold the Shift key. This will allow you to snap the view that you're in. Sculpting is straightforward. To start it, hold the left click on the mouse on the mesh. However, I would advise not to use a mouse. Use a graphics tablet as you will have more control. Sculpting with a graphics tablet is essential. As you're using the pen, you can use the pressure sensitivity to increase the depth of the mesh. The harder you press, the more depth it is. It's pretty straightforward. Just use a graphics tablet. To invert sculpt, hold the Alt key whilst pressing left click or putting pressure on the graphics tablet. It's useful to know some shortcuts as well for sculpting. One handy one is increasing the brush size. To increase it, hold the S key and drag the slider. The brushes are accessed on the left hand side of the interface. The shortcut to access these is by pressing B or holding space. Space is a bit more complex. It allows you to change the brush size, fall off, and the depth, whereas B just has all the brushes that you need. So subtools on the right under the toolbar, this is where you access your meshes for your project where you begin sculpting. It's a bit confusing, but once you start sculpting and using this more often, you'll get used to it. So subtools are pretty much like layers, but they're not actually layers. They're just meshes upon meshes basically, and when you start sculpting you'll pretty much be using this a lot. So when you start your project in ZBrush, you will be given the default sphere mesh, which is fine. To insert the mesh or more meshes that are similar shapes, click on the insert tab which is in the subtool box. Another way to do this is by clicking append. Alright, so now you're in the middle of sculpting and you have two meshes. You want to switch between the meshes, but you don't want to click on the subtool tab. So there's a way to switch between the meshes really quickly, and it's by simply clicking on the mesh whilst holding Alt and the left click to whichever mesh you want to work on. It's really handy once you start to sculpt something really complex and you have several subtools and you get really tired of using the tool section. I've been there and it's annoying. It's really useful just to get used to the shortcuts. I highly advise it. Just keep sculpting, use the shortcuts, practice, make macros, and you will love using ZBrush. Alright, so renaming is really useful. I highly advise it. This really depends on whichever sculpting method you have. Say if you have two meshes that are exactly the same, but you want to adjust one, you have a copy, but it's really annoying to have the duplicate name on. It's highly advised just to rename the meshes that you're working on. It will avoid complication and it will increase your workflow. The shortcuts to draw, move, scale, and rotate are Q, W, E, R, Y. It's pretty straightforward. Q, W, E, R, Y. Saving is essential whilst using ZBrush or any other program. You don't want to work on something very long and lose it. It's frustrating, it will happen. But to avoid this, press Ctrl S or go on File and find Save. Just have Ctrl S or have it as a macro.